Hello again, everybody. Here's a nice little game that was played in 1945 in California with Essen with the white pieces and Duff with the black, and it's a center game, and it goes like this: E4, E5, D4, and black takes off the D-pawn. White recaptures with the queen. Black now hits at the queen with knight c6. White moves the queen back to e3. Black now plays b6. White brings the knight out to c3. And now black plays the bishop to c5, hitting at the queen again. So white swings the queen over to g3, hitting at black's g-pawn. So black just moves the g-pawn up to g6. White now moves his knight at c3 up to d5. Black plays his d-pawn up to d6, letting out his other bishop. And now white plays his bishop at c1 to g5, hitting at the black queen. Now black has to be very careful here because he can get into serious trouble if he makes the wrong move. For instance, if he tries to just move the queen up to d7, that actually loses the rook in the corner at h8, because white would then play bishop to f6, and black cannot take that bishop, because if he does take the bishop with the knight, then white simply plays knight takes f6 check with a fork of the king and the queen. Black can also, he can really get into trouble if he tries to just block the attack from the bishop. For instance, if he takes the knight at g8 and plays it to e7, that actually loses the game, because white will play knight to f6 check, and black's only move is king to f8, and white finishes with bishop to h6, checkmate. So black just decides to block the attack by playing the f-pawn up to f6, and of course hitting at the bishop itself. So white swings his queen back over to c3, and now the f-pawn is pinned, obviously, because if it takes the bishop, white will take the rook in the corner. So black decides to take care of that problem. He takes his knight at c6 and moves it over to e5. So now the bishop looks like it's going to have to move. But instead, white decides to counterattack, and he plays his b-pawn up to b4. And black's bishop is trapped. So black just decides to go ahead and take off the bishop at g5. And white takes off the black bishop at c5, and black recaptures the c-pawn with the b-pawn. And now white plays his other knight up to f3. And if black would make the mistake of taking that knight at f3 with check, white would simply recapture with the g-pawn, and once again black is going to lose a piece. If he doesn't do anything about protecting the rook in the corner, he could play knight f6, but then of course white could just swoop down and take the knight. So instead of taking the knight at f3 with check, black decides to retreat the knight and protect the rook in the corner at the same time. He plays knight to f7. And now white comes in with another bold move. He takes the pawn at g5 with the knight. And obviously black can't take the knight, because if he takes the knight, for instance, with that knight at f7, then obviously the queen will just take the rook in the corner. And if black would take the knight with the queen, then white has knight takes c7 check with a fork of the king and the rook, and he'll come out ahead in material. So And by the way, knight's move by taking the pawn at g5 is also attacking the knight at f7. In other words, he's threatening to take it, and now the rook in the corner again has no protection. And black realizes the only way he can protect that knight at f7 is to take his other knight at g8 and play it to h6. And that's what he does. So now, white gets in a check with his bishop at b5. Black blocks the check with his own bishop. And now white plays a really nice move. He plays the knight from g5 to e6, hitting at the queen. And obviously the bishop can't capture since it's pinned. And black just takes his queen and moves it over to c8. And at this point, white, if he wants to, can take that c-pawn with either knight with check and win the exchange and probably the game. But white actually sees a better move. And that's why it's now time for the challenge to the viewer. If you'd like to pause the video now and see if you can find white's next move, I'll wait for you. White plays queen to f6, obviously threatening to play queen to e7, checkmate. And black realizes he's only got one move that'll stop that. He takes the knight at h6 and moves it back to g8, which not only hits at the queen but also protects the e7 square. But it turns out it doesn't really do that, because white goes ahead and plays queen to e7, check. And after black captures the queen with the knight, white finishes the game with knight to f6, checkmate. Look at the four knights all together. A very unique checkmating position, don't you think? Well, anyway, I hope you enjoyed the game, and I'll see you next time.